It was supposed to be a secret code for dinner, June 4th, 1968, the Ambassador Hotel, Los Angeles. Inside the fifth-floor suite, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and victory. Andy Williams stood by the television, watching his best friend, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, claim victory in the California primary. Before leaving the room, Bobby had pulled Andy aside. He knew the ballroom downstairs would be a zoo. Press, screamers, donors. He wanted an out. "Watch me," Bobby had whispered with a conspiratorial grin. "When I'm done, I'll touch my ear. Just a quick tap. That means I'm wrapping up. Meet me at the car. We'll go get the biggest steak in Los Angeles." On the TV screen, Bobby finished his speech. The crowd roared. And then he did it. A subtle, quick brush of his hand against his ear. The signal. Andy smiled and turned to his wife, Claudine. "That's it. Grab your coat. We're going to dinner with the next president of the United States." They headed for the door, laughing, already tasting the celebration. But Bobby Kennedy never made it to the car. And 36 hours later, Andy Williams wasn't eating steak with his friend. He was standing in a sterile, freezing hospital room alongside astronaut John Glenn, performing a task that no friend should ever have to perform. They weren't celebrating. They were dressing Bobby Kennedy's body for his funeral. And in that cold room, they realized they had made a terrible mistake. They had forgotten the one thing a man needs to be buried with dignity. Andy looked in the mirror. He looked at his own neck. And in that moment, he made a decision that would bond them forever. On paper, Andy Williams and Bobby Kennedy should have been enemies. Andy was a corn-fed boy from Iowa, a staunch Republican who believed in small government and traditional order. Bobby was the fiery liberal prince of Camelot, a man who wanted to tear down the system to save it. But in the mid-1960s, in the hallways of NBC studios in Burbank, California, fate intervened. Andy was there taping his variety show. Bobby was there for an interview. They collided in a corridor, started talking about football, and didn't stop for an hour. Andy was captivated. He had spent his life in Hollywood, surrounded by people who pretended to listen while looking over your shoulder for someone more important. Bobby was different, Andy later wrote. When he looked at you, he saw you. The rest of the room disappeared. It didn't matter if you were a waiter or a movie star. That hallway chat turned into dinners. Dinners turned into weekends at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. The Republican crooner and the Democrat senator became inseparable. Their families merged. They rafted down dangerous rivers in Colorado. They sang songs around the piano until 3 a.m. Andy saw the Bobby the public didn't, the father who rolled on the grass with his kids, the man who carried the weight of his brother John's assassination in his eyes every single day. When Bobby announced his run for president in 1968, Andy did something that shocked his fan base and terrified his managers. He defected. He publicly endorsed Bobby. He traveled the country, warming up crowds, risking his conservative career to tell America that this Democrat was the only man who could heal the country. "I don't care about the party," Andy told a reporter. "I care about the man, and I trust him with my life." Fast forward to June 4th, the night of the signal. Andy and Claudine were halfway to the service elevator when the hotel room phone rang. Andy hesitated. They were already late meeting Bobby at the car, but instinct made him pick it up. It was a campaign aide. The voice on the other end wasn't speaking. It was screaming. "Turn on the TV! Don't go downstairs! Turn on the TV!" Andy fumbled with the knobs. The screen flickered to life. 5 minutes ago, it had been a celebration. Now, it was a nightmare. Cameras were swinging wildly. Men were wrestling on the floor. A woman was screaming, "Oh God, not again! Not again!" And then the reporter, his voice shaking. "Senator Kennedy has been shot. He is down. I repeat, Senator Kennedy is down." The signal. The ear touch. It had happened moments ago. Andy felt the room spin. It was a mistake. It had to be firecrackers. Bobby was invincible. He had just won. But it wasn't a mistake. Sirhan had been waiting in the kitchen pantry with a .22 caliber revolver. Andy and Claudine rushed to Good Samaritan Hospital. The scene was pure chaos. Police, Secret Service, weeping family members. When Andy saw Ethel, Bobby's wife, she wasn't crying. She was in shock, staring at a wall. "He's tough, Andy," she whispered. "He's so tough." But the bullet had entered the brain. For 26 hours, the world held its breath. Andy didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just paced the hallway, praying for a miracle that deep down he knew wasn't coming. On June 6th, shortly after 1 a.m., the machines were turned off. Camelot had fallen again. In the blur of grief that followed, Ethel Kennedy pulled Andy aside. She looked small, broken. "We're taking him back to New York," she said softly. "St. Patrick's Cathedral. But, Andy, I can't do it. I can't get him ready." She didn't have to explain. She couldn't bear to dress her husband's body. "I need you," she said. "You and John." John Glenn, the astronaut, another close friend. Two American icons, a singer and a spaceman, tasked with the grim duty of preparing their friend for his final flight. "We'll do it," Andy said. They drove to Bobby's rented house in Los Angeles to get his clothes. The house was eerie. There were half-empty coffee cups on the table, campaign notes on the desk, a life interrupted in mid-sentence. They went to the closet. They picked out his best navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, black shoes, the uniform of a statesman. They drove back to the hospital, carrying the clothes like holy relics. The room where Bobby lay was cold. The air smelled of antiseptic and finality. Andy and John Glenn worked in silence. It was an intimate, devastating act, sliding the arms into the jacket, buttoning the shirt, putting on the shoes that would never walk another step. They treated him not as a corpse, but as the senator, gentle, respectful. They finished. They stepped back to look at their friend. And that's when John Glenn let out a sharp breath. "Oh no!" "What?" Andy asked. "The tie," Glenn whispered. "We forgot a tie." Panic set in. They had the suit, the shirt, the shoes, but the neck was bare. It was the middle of the night. The stores were closed. The plane to New York was waiting on the tarmac. There was no time to go back to the house. They couldn't send him to his own funeral with an open collar. It was undignified. It was wrong. Andy stared at Bobby's pale face. He looked so peaceful, yet so incomplete. Then, slowly, Andy reached up to his own neck. He was wearing a dark blue silk tie. It was the tie he had put on 24 hours ago. The tie he was wearing when Bobby won California. The tie he was wearing when Bobby touched his ear to signal dinner. The tie he was wearing when the shots rang out. This piece of silk had witnessed the highest high and the lowest low. It held the sweat of the campaign and the tears of the vigil. "Andy," Glenn said, "you don't have to—" "Yes," Andy said, his voice trembling. "I do." He loosened the knot. He pulled the silk from his own collar. It felt warm in his hands. He leaned over the metal table. "I'm sorry we missed dinner, Bob," he whispered. With shaking hands, Andy Williams lifted his best friend's head and slipped his own tie around Bobby Kennedy's neck. He tied the knot carefully, a perfect Windsor, just the way Bobby liked it. He smoothed the collar. Now he was ready. "That belongs to him now," Andy said. "It always did." The funeral at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York was a global event. Presidents, kings, and millions of viewers watched. Andy was asked to sing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It was Bobby's favorite hymn. Andy stood at the pulpit. He looked at the flag-draped coffin. He knew what was underneath that flag. He knew that around the neck of the man inside was the tie off his own neck. He started to sing. "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." His voice wavered. The grief was a physical weight in his chest. He wanted to stop. He wanted to collapse. But then he pictured Bobby. He pictured that grin. He pictured the ear signal. "Come on, Andy, finish the show." He pushed through the tears. He sang for the friend who couldn't hear him, or maybe the friend who was the only one listening. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the cathedral. A year later, Andy and Claudine had a baby boy. They didn't name him after a saint or a king. They named him Bobby. Andy Williams lived a long life. He became Mr. Christmas. He built a theater in Branson. He smiled on album covers for 40 more years. But he never forgot that night in the hospital. Decades later, when Andy passed away in 2012, people went through his belongings. They found photos of him with presidents, with movie stars, with legends. But the most precious photo was a candid black and white shot from 1968. It shows Andy and Bobby laughing together on a campaign bus. In the photo, Andy is wearing a dark blue silk tie. That tie isn't in a museum. It isn't in a closet in Branson. It is buried 6 feet underground at Arlington National Cemetery, resting forever against the heart of Robert F. Kennedy. Bobby never made it to that dinner at the Ambassador Hotel, but Andy made sure he didn't go into the dark alone. He gave him a part of himself to take on the journey, because that's what friends do. They show up. They dress you when you can't dress yourself, and they give you their own dignity when yours has been taken away. The signal was for dinner. The tie was for eternity. If this story of friendship and sacrifice moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone you hold dear. We all have people we'd give the shirt off our back for. Tell us about your Bobby in the comments. And remember to ring the bell so you never miss the true stories behind the history you thought you knew.